A moment later, Asha grabbed the girl, gently lifting her off the floor, reminding her that running was dangerous. The main character tried to resist, but it was clear she was powerless here. Asha took her into his arms, smiling mischievously. He said it was now his turn. Lariette, closing her eyes, expected him to throw her into the water, imagining she'd be soaked to the skin. But that wasn't what happened. Asha carried her to the bedroom, laying her softly on the bed. He hovered over her, his eyes gleaming with cunning and desire. With a smirk, he explained that this was his revenge. In the morning, Candle left for the imperial castle. Loretta, waking up, felt utterly drained, as if all her strength had been sucked out of her. She thought to herself that her lover was truly a terrible beast. Sometime later, the butler approached her, reporting that there had been no contact from the temple yet. The girl felt a growing concern, wondering if Doha was preoccupied or if something had gone wrong. The man standing beside her then asked if the lady had any plans for the day. Larette's gaze fell on her notebook, where she had written down all her important goals over the last 3 months. Feeling melancholic, she replied that she would need to go to the center. She didn't elaborate on why, but she knew it was time to slowly start preparing for her departure. As she walked through the bustling streets, Lariette thought about the things she needed to buy: comfortable clothes, a new bag, and books, since Doha had been giving her enough money to cover her needs. After each treatment, the girl didn't need to worry anymore. The main character was pleased, knowing that if someone tried to attack her this time, she could clearly fight back. After all, learning magic hadn't been in vain. As she walked the streets, Gerard, following his master's orders, shadowed her, discreetly removing anyone he deemed suspicious. Despite this, Gerard never once felt that she was being followed, even though Gerard was always just a step behind, lurking in the shadows. After purchasing everything she needed, Loretta found herself struggling with the heavy bag she carried, complaining to herself about its weight. As she scanned the crowd, something caught her attention. A familiar bright head. It was Princess Eliza. Overjoyed, Loretta couldn't believe her luck at running into her here. Just as she was about to approach the princess, she overheard a group of men nearby. They were discussing a woman and dismissing the idea that she could ever have a serious relationship. They went on to insult the princess, saying no one would want to be with someone like her. Hearing this, Loretta was furious and felt the urge to destroy them right then and there, but she knew she needed to handle the situation more cleverly. Putting on a sweet smile, Loretta approached the men and told them that her friend, who was waiting in one of the nearby alleys, wanted to speak with them. She added that her friend was too shy to approach them directly and had sent her to relay the message. The men, intrigued and flustered by this, immediately began to argue about which one of them had been called. Without further discussion, they followed Loretta into the alley. Once they arrived, they looked around in confusion, realizing there was no one there. Just as they turned to question Loretta, she acted swiftly. Using her magic, she began to speak about how justice had called them, her eyes glowing with power. With the help of magic, Loretta lifted everything around her and hurled it at the men. They tried to escape, their eyes filled with fear, but each one was knocked unconscious when something wooden struck them on the head. Pleased with herself, Loretta looked at the fallen men, but she couldn't shake the anger from how they had discussed her friend. She considered them to be vile creatures. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out from behind. Turning around, Loretta saw Princess Eliza leaning against a wall, watching her. Eliza complimented Loretta, saying what she had done was very impressive and that she was touched by it. Blushing, Loretta shyly asked when she had been standing there watching. Eliza walked closer, putting her arm around Loretta's shoulder. She admitted she was extremely surprised when Loretta referred to her friend as Justice. Looking at the princess, Loretta realized Eliza had witnessed everything. She was also surprised by how skilled Loretta was with magic. With a gleam in her eye, Eliza asked if Loretta would be interested in working for her in the future. The suggestion made Loretta tense up. She didn't have much of a future due to her illness, but she couldn't bring herself to tell Eliza that. Besides, it was hard to refuse someone with such a kind face. Eliza smiled, saying they could discuss it later, and then, pulling Loretta along with her, suggested they go buy something tasty since it was the perfect time for a treat. At that very moment, Doha and his subordinate were watching them from behind. The subordinate informed Doha that Lariette was going somewhere with a man. They didn't know the man was actually Princess Eliza. The high priest told his subordinate to be quiet, regarding Eliza as an enemy of the people. Doha, however, kept thinking about how he wanted to kill this man, not realizing it was a woman. He saw her as a competitor, dreaming of erasing her from existence. His eyes burned with anger, but he didn't know how to deal with his emotions. He still tried to convince himself that he wanted to use Lariette for his own purposes, that he needed her by his side. Mikhail, the high priest, refused to believe he was in love with Lariette, though his heart contradicted him with opposite feelings. He tried to shut those feelings out, rejecting the idea of love altogether. On a previous day, he had met with his rival in the temple. The rival had directly told him there wasn't a moment he regretted bringing him to the temple. Doha had grinned and replied that it was good. After all, he was of rather humble origin. The man turned and asked what the matter was. Mikhail, looking at him intently, asked if Brother Hail had any questions for him. Hail, giving him a strange look, said he didn't understand at all what Mikhail meant. But Doha knew that his father's health was only getting worse, posing an immediate threat to him. Though Hill held great authority and had more connections than Doha, the high priest knew his abilities surpassed anyone else's. As the second candidate for Pope, it was clear that Hill might be eyeing the death of the first candidate, his rival. Suddenly, Hail began speaking about how he had heard that Mikhail often left the temple, as if hiding something interesting outside. Unexpectedly, he asked if Doha had acquired a lover. The question struck Mikhail to his core, as if it had pierced him directly. He remained silent, repeating to himself that Hail must never know about his feelings for Lariette. The man considered Lariette his treasure, and he wouldn't share her with anyone. He could never forgive himself if anyone even laid a finger on her. Moreover, Mikhail couldn't allow this disgusting bastard to harm her, not for anything in the world. With that in mind, he decided to act on his own terms. A grin spread across his face as he looked at Huliel, telling him that he had quite the imagination. Mikhail added that with age, one usually became more childish, humiliating Huliel with his words. Mikhail approached Huliel, whispering in his ear. He stated that this was his last warning, and added that it would be better for him not to provoke him further with his foolish actions. He told Hill that he didn't know what he could do in a fit of rage, but Hill wasn't afraid of him. Grinning, Hill remarked that Mikhail was no different from his mother, starting an affair and acting like a fool. That was the last straw. The high priest could no longer control himself. His eyes burning with fury, he lunged at the man, grabbing him by the collar, clearly intent on destroying him and leaving no trace of his opponent. The memory of his mother's love for him as a child flooded his mind. How she had once said she couldn't live without him. But now, with Hill's insulting words about both him and his mother, he was enraged. Mikhail's partner tried to pull him away, reminding him that he had an important meeting scheduled. However, Hill ignored the partner's attempts, shrugging off Mikhail's hand and explaining that Mikhail should be more careful. With that, he turned and began to walk away. Mikhail, on the verge of rushing at him to finish what he started, was held back by his partner. As Hill walked off, he called Mikhail a brat. The partner, seeing the tension between the two candidates for Pope, realized that it was best to calm Mikhail down before things escalated further. He decided to distract his boss by mentioning that they had received another letter from the Kandel Dush, where Doha was being asked to come. Upon hearing this, Mikhail's eyes widened in alarm. His subordinate went on to explain how their previous letters had been ignored, asking if they should respond in some way. As Mikhail thought about everything, he suddenly recalled Hill's earlier question about his beloved Lariette. A lump formed in Mikhail's throat, and a wave of fear washed over him. He didn't know what to do. His opponent could definitely use Lariette as a weak point against him, and that could never happen. If he let his stupid feelings get in the way and made a mistake because of them, he would never forgive himself. Dating Lariette was a mistake. He loved her, but he knew that. Mikhail decided that he had to inform his subordinate to stop any further contact with the douche. Then he added that he wanted to take a walk and asked for a carriage to be prepared. As he looked at Lariette in the embrace of someone else, walking beside them, it was an agonizing test of his restraint. He grabbed the collar of his shirt tightly, trying to convince himself that all these emotions were just an illusion. Turning to his subordinate, he ordered that a letter be sent to the Duce after all, explaining that he would be visiting them the following day. Meanwhile, Eliza and Lariette were having lunch in a restaurant. The princess told Lariette that she liked her and that, if it weren't for her brother, they would have met much earlier. Then, Eliza added that there were strange rumours circulating about him. Surprised, Lariette asked what those rumours were. Eliza explained that people were saying her brother was suffering from a terrible disease, one so severe that he never left the mansion. Rumours claimed his appearance had been horribly disfigured in an accident, leaving him disabled. Eliza also shared that there were whispers about the disease being connected to manna, and that his parents were beside themselves, unable to find any peace or solutions. The princess then announced the name of the disease, Radura disease. Larette's eyes widened in shock upon hearing this. She immediately thought that she had been diagnosed with the same condition, realizing that it could be hereditary. Eliza, looking at Lariette with concern, explained that she had been thinking of what Lariette needed to know since these were her relatives. However, it was only now that Eliza realized just how much Lariette was shaken by the news. The girl couldn't listen anymore, as an overwhelming sense of panic and fear took over her. She started feeling sick. Lariette thought to herself that if she had told anyone about her diagnosis, she would have been treated differently, and that thought annoyed her. Noticing Larette's condition, the princess asked if she was okay, as she seemed pale. Quickly, Lariette masked her emotions, flashing a smile and telling Eliza that she was fine. In fact, she felt relieved. She didn't want anyone to know about her impending death. Her mind raced with the thought that she needed to die in a place where no one would notice. The next day, when Doha finally arrived at the Duce, Lariette greeted him with a concerned expression. She told him she was very worried. Surprised, he asked if she was truly concerned. Lariette replied that she was wondering if he had been searching for mercenaries and if he had any injuries. Doha, remembering his rival with evident hostility, replied that Lariette could call it that, as this man was now the first to want his death. Lariette smiled at him and told him to contact her as often as possible, because they needed to stay in touch. Suddenly, Doha asked aloud what kind of relationship they had. Only after speaking did he realize he had voiced the question unintentionally. However, Lariette didn't find it strange. She calmly explained that they were very close friends. He nodded, then, taking her hand, he began to heal her. Lariette felt much better thanks to him, but her thoughts were filled with a desire to die without pain. Meanwhile, Doha's thoughts were entirely different. As he held Larette's hand, his heart pounded in his chest, and even his ears turned red. He couldn't understand what was happening and hoped she wouldn't feel his heartbeat through their touch. He prayed that she wouldn't notice, because if she did, she would probably avoid him. Just then, a voice interrupted their moment. It was the butler, informing Lariette that she had received a letter. Doha looked at Larette's friend with suspicion. The main character opened the envelope and saw that Eliza had sent her a letter, calling her beloved companion. Upon hearing this, Doha suddenly became thoughtful. Recalling the events of the previous day and the sight of Lariette with a stranger, he compared everything and, in that moment, finally understood what was really happening. When the high priest uttered the strange term of endearment, Lariette felt awkward and quickly felt the need to explain. She told him that before they had only been acquaintances, but now they had become friends. Eliza was the first lady with whom she had forged a real friendship. Lariette, a bit embarrassed, explained that they shared many common interests, and that's why they were truly good friends. Doha, reaching out to gently touch a strand of her hair, asked her to focus only on him when they were alone. It seemed the man didn't understand that Lariette was talking about a woman, not a man. As she looked at him, Lariette realized that he might be feeling neglected, and a wave of guilt washed over her. She even felt a bit ashamed. However, Doha quickly regained his composure and apologized, saying that he had crossed a line. Lariette reassured him, telling him that such things could cause conflicting feelings. After that, she took his hand, but she noticed that his magic suddenly stopped. This made her pause, contemplating something. Smiling at him, Lariette remembered that it was time to start their lesson. Doha, returning her smile, couldn't shake the feeling of sadness that had settled in his chest. As they began the next training session, Lariette showcased her skills, while Doha leaned against the windowsill, silently watching her. As Doha's gaze shifted to the view from the window, he noticed a man and quickly realized that he was one of the knights serving Duke Candle. Mikhail also observed that the knight had impressive stealth skills. Doha saw that the knight was heading in an unknown direction, but he quickly pushed aside his curiosity. If the knight's actions didn't pose a threat to Lariette, then it certainly didn't concern him. At one of the meetings, the head of the Blanc family argued with a man, trying to convince him that Duke Candle was obligated to join the war. He argued that they couldn't run from the kingdom, tails between their legs. Larette's father then asked how the emperor had responded to this, and the man revealed that the head of the kingdom respected George's choice, acknowledging that despite the inevitable losses, they had to fight. If they retreated, the emperor himself would take action. Another man pointed out that while they couldn't ignore the readiness of the Danube Kingdom's soldiers, their numbers were insufficient unless Duke Candle joined them. Asher, however, couldn't help but recall the painful memories of the war, which had consumed most of his time. He had no desire to return to the battlefield. He wondered if he could ever just live peacefully with the person he loved, wishing for nothing more than to be left alone. Lost in thought, Asher was suddenly interrupted when someone gently poked him on the shoulder. Turning around, he saw Lady Merchant standing before him. She smiled and called him by name, saying they had met again. This casual behavior irritated him, as only one person was allowed to call him by name. But then he remembered that this was Larette's friend, so he tried to explain as gently as possible that she hadn't been given permission to call him by his name. Embarrassed, Lady Merchant stammered and apologized, explaining that she had heard Lariette call him by his name, so she thought it was okay to do the same. She quickly changed the subject, asking if he remembered her name. Asher's thoughts were consumed by the fact that this lady was a friend of his beloved, but he remained silent, not responding. Lady Merchant realized he didn't remember her name and introduced herself as Sharia, offering him the option of calling her Sherry. While Asher had no particular interest in her, he decided to listen in silence as she was Larette's friend. She continued to chat away, and Asher found himself counting the seconds, wondering how much longer he would have to endure her conversation. Sharia, eager to embellish the situation, mentioned that she and Lariette had become very close recently and had decided to meet again soon. Asher didn't answer her, lost in his thoughts. He couldn't help but wonder that if his beloved had more friends, she might forget about her priest friend. Suddenly, Lady Merchant began talking about how she didn't know what other nobles thought, but she believed it was wrong to form friendships based solely on status. Asher didn't understand why she was saying this. He thought she was referring to the difference between the princess and the other ladies. He assumed that Lariette, however, was not biased in such matters. Thinking of his beloved brought a slight smile and blush to Asher's face. He longed to see her as soon as possible. It had been a difficult day without her. Sharia, noticing the smile on his face, thought it was because of her. Smiling slightly to herself, she believed that everyone liked cute girls. In her opinion, she was the only noble woman who treated commoners as well as she did. She felt that her kindness to Lariette proved her own incomparability. After considering this, she decided to invite the Duke to dinner next time. With a sweet smile, she told him that it would be nice to get to know him better. Asher, looking at her with an indifferent expression, responded, "So be it, if my beloved does not mind," before bowing slightly. He then excused himself, saying it was time for him to leave quickly and rushing home. As he hurried back, Asher's thoughts were consumed with how he needed to get home as fast as possible to kiss Lariette. Lady Sharia, watching him walk away, silently wondered how long the relationship between the Duke and the commoner could last. Remembering the smile on Asher's face, She told herself to be careful and not fall in love with him before the right time, but deep down, she knew it was already too late.